Okay, today, topic 9 today. So just get this computer up and running. There we go. So we were talking about water processing for drinking and municipal water. And so now we want to talk about wastewater. But before we talk about the processing, I want to talk a little bit about different types of wastewater and things around collection. And so it's sort of this topic of some miscellaneous things sort of put together here. And so let's talk about what all this stuff is, right? In terms of wastewater. If you think about wastewater, there's a few different types. We have one group called domestic or sanitary wastewater. I know it's a funny term to say sanitary. Usually when we think about sanitary, we think about people washing their hands and doing things to clean things up. So why is this water sanitary? It's using the word sanitary more or less in the term of that we're separating it, right? We're not necessarily just dumping into a river. It means we're separating it to treat it. That's sort of where the term means sanitary, means separate. So our house actually has two types of wastewater, gray water and black water. Most homes do not separate these out. It all goes to the sewer. But some places do separate them out. I was reading about a resort in it's somewhere near Las Vegas, but not that close because it was somewhere in the mountains anyway out there. And it was talking about how they had access to, like, most of the water they had was actually snowmelt, and because they're on a mountain. And so they were actually separating out their waste into two streams: black water, which would get treated as wastewater, and of course it could have pathogens in it because it might have feces in it. And then the gray water was actually cleaned up in another way and recycled. And most of the gray water actually ended up in toilets, and mostly just going through filters and being flushed, right? So they had a system to be a little bit more efficient, but you don't usually see this unless you're on like very limited water, or I don't know what they do in the space station, but I imagine they've got some pretty interesting water recycling systems going on. So that's all wastewater. And then of course we have industrial wastewater and stormwater. So
Blaine?
Yeah.
I don't know if, but my little brother Omar once did a science fair project with gray water.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he used it to, apparently he used the gray water to like water plants.
Yeah, of course. It kind of depends on what's in it and how polluted it is, but it's a little bit easier to clean up than the black water, of course, because it doesn't have the feces in it. So it's not usually going to be, it's not necessarily going to make you sick, right? In that way. And sure, why not, right? If it's mostly water, if you can clean it up a little bit, the plants don't mind. So I was going to say industrial wastewater could mean many things. If this was industrial, could mean a restaurant in town, right? And so most of their stuff is just going down the sewer and being treated with all the other public wastewater. Some industries are polluting majorly, and they would have their own cleanup systems, right? So every industry is a little bit different, just depending on what they're doing. Stormwater is considered wastewater, but it's also separate as well. So most stormwater, you probably know it, goes into your lawn or goes down the street. But we do get quite a bit of stormwater in towns, and we can't just have flooding, so we have to deal with that as well. So this is something we'll talk about, kind of is the big difference between the sanitary wastewater and the stormwater. So if you hear me say sanitary, I really just mean mostly stuff coming from your house and drains around the town, right? Schools and businesses and whatnot.
Blaine?
Yeah.
What out of these three wastewater samples, what would be the most foul, most dirty? Would it be the storm or the industrial?
It depends on the type of industry, right? So like if you look at for example, oil sands, a lot of their wastewater is sitting there in tailings ponds, and they're still trying to figure out how to treat it. Whereas if you have wastewater from, let's say, a company making yogurt, The water is not necessarily too polluted. It's usually quite acidic, and that's kind of the big problem. So every industry has its own challenges in terms of how they're polluting water. If you're using water for, cooling in a system, the water itself isn't polluted except for with heat. So that's a different kind of challenge, cooling it down before it gets discharged, right?
Yeah.
So it really just depends on the industry.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess I had already mentioned this, right? Domestic or sanitary is what we're going to see from houses and sort of typical businesses, includes both the gray water and black water. And so here's some data. I think this is probably I probably showed you a slide like this similar before, and you can see kind of the big three uses from residences are bathing, washing clothes, and flushing toilets. Obviously, we use water for other things. And so most of that wastewater is going to be just water, but it's going to have some solids in there as well. And just depends on exactly what's going on in your house too, of course. So I wanted to show you this as well, excuse me, because this is something that, any city, around with their zoning and infrastructure, they have to think about what's going on in terms of the kind of businesses, right? So you folks may know about this housing area near the college, sort of across the street from Home Hardware. I found that an interesting place because when I first moved here, so 12 years ago, that was basically a bunch of mud. And it took them a long time to get those places built. And one of the crucial things was actually had to do with wastewater. You can't just build a bunch of houses if you can't deal with the wastewater. And so there's this formulas for different kinds of businesses too, right? They're assuming that, airports and gas stations are going to have a certain amount of wastewater per customer kind of thing per day. So all these things have to go into the systems when they design them. So what does wastewater look like? In terms of solids and chemical and biological characteristics, it's polluted. It has stuff in it. And usually they're measuring solids is a big part of it. And they're also measuring basically plant fertilizers, your ammonias and your nitrates. And the other major thing they're measuring, of course, is the amount of organisms in there in the coliforms and fecal coliforms, right? And a few other things are measured. So these are pretty typical things that are measured at wastewater treatment plants. If you take a look at what the levels are supposed to be like before we are allowed to discharge them, you can see those numbers are quite a bit lower. So this was revised. You can see this was a few years ago, 5 years ago, but before that, the numbers were a little looser. I think, for example, BOD was allowed to be 15 or 20 before that, total suspended solids. So the government has decided, that it was reasonable to change their limitations, and they're able to meet these limitations for these different parameters. You can see this one also has temperature on it, not to alter the ambient temperature by more than 1 degree Celsius. So pretty strict on that end. But like I said, we're not wanting to be in the business of killing all the fish. That's definitely a bad thing. So this is the aim, right? And I think when we go to the wastewater treatment plant, I think I actually got this off their fridge in the lab. I think I took a photo of it from the fridge in the lab. So take a look for it, see if it's still there. I'll skip that one. So what about these organics? We can kind of classify organics into different categories, and don't want you to worry too much about these different categories. But a big part of what is in the water is organics. If you think about it, right? All the waste that's coming from our food, the waste that's going down our toilet. We're looking at all sorts of organic chemicals, and all the things that are in there. It could be cellulose, could be proteins, it could be waste fats, and so on. And all of these things fall into different categories. And if you're in the industry, sometimes you're concerned about certain types more than other types. But like I said, I just wanted to kind of show you there are quite a bit of different types of organic compounds that need to get broken down eventually. One thing we're starting to see a lot of cities promote awareness around is fat, oil, and grease. We actually had a billboard coming into town a few years ago. I haven't seen it in a while. I meant to actually take a photo of it, and then it disappeared. They had a website set up to promote awareness around people disposing of their fat, oil, and grease. So you may know this or you may not, but you're not supposed to dump fat and oil and grease down your drain, right? All the businesses know this because if they do that, they're going to get fined. It's going to be really bad. But think about it: if you have melted, let's say, margarine or butter, and that goes down your drain and it solidifies, it's going to clog up your drain. And so they're trying to promote awareness around this to tell people, okay, when you're cleaning things out, think about how much you're putting down that drain, because this can cause all sorts of different problems. You can see it talks about some of the problems such as odor and clogging and things like that. So I want to just show you something in regards to this. I don't know if anyone saw this in the news. This was a few years ago, but the London Fatberg. This was making the headlines. This fatberg, so they're kind of play on words, made out of fat, and it's giant like a big iceberg. And there's a photo of it, and it was clogging up the sewers in London. This is London, England. You can imagine the sewers are old there, and we're talking about hundreds of years of people dumping their fat and grease down there. And that's how big it was: 250 meters long and 130 tons of fat. So how do you deal with this? I mean, this just sounded really, really disgusting. Here's an infographic showing you about how big it is compared to the London Bridge. And, if you compare it to some Airbuses or some elephants, 19 elephants worth in terms of weight, this was a monster, this whole thing. And like I said, it was in the news like crazy, and I was learning all sorts of things about it. There's another a photo of it. And so wait, I'll show you an analysis here in a minute. But you can see they're talking about how they basically jackhammers and hard work was what got them to remove it, and it cost them about $80 million, which is like a ridiculous amount of money. So there's a little image of it, and I'm just holding my stomach, right? Oh boy, that stuff is looking nasty. So there's a quote. He says, this guy, he says, it smells like rotting meat mixed with the odor of a smelly toilet. Wonderful. Another quote: it's a total monster. It's basically like trying to break up concrete. So this is somebody who had to deal with it. So I have some information about this. So they did some analysis on the whole thing. And this is the autopsy. And so 90% of it was cooking fat. So palmitic acid is a pretty common fatty acid you'd find in all sorts of cooking oils. It's found naturally in all sorts of plants, sunflower oil and canola oil and whatnot. So no surprise there, right? That this is down there. But notice that last statement on the slide is that much of this was held together by wet wipes, right? So things like baby wipes. And you can, I've seen them in the pharmacy. I've seen these products called flushable wet wipes that people can apparently use for personal reasons. Don't flush them unless you're trying to keep all the plumbers out there in business. I was actually talking to a plumber the other day, and for some reason it came up in conversation. He said something about wet wipes keeping him employed. The number of people having issues with these things clogging up the systems. It is the kind of thing that can break apart in your hand almost instantly. So toilet paper, when it's wet, does break down instantly in your hand. But wet wipes are designed to be more durable because you're wiping a baby's bum or something else. And they actually have microfibers of plastic in there that are holding them together. And of course, what they found was that all this fat was captured by these people flushing wet wipes and then forming this giant fatberg. So fun. Other products in there, probably no surprises. People flush a lot of things besides, their poo and stuff. So they found diapers and tampons and condoms. And of course, all sorts of microorganisms were found in the fatberg. Interesting enough, this is the one thing I found really interesting is they actually did a pharmaceutical analysis. And you can see the top 5, again, probably no surprise what was found in there, right? Number 1 was Tylenol. So, I mean, how many people have taken a Tylenol today, right? Pretty common drug for people to take. You can see also other Other products there, so salicylic acid, which is apparently found in creams for acne. Dietary supplements, I'm not familiar with Osterin, but apparently used for muscle gain, and of course asthma medication as well. This doesn't necessarily reflect the most common medications. Some things break down a lot quicker than others. I didn't realize Tylenol was so stable. So this is something we're looking for, right? Is these organics in the wastewater. And so we need to figure out if we're breaking them down or not. And so we talked a little bit about doing BOD as a test, so biological oxygen demand as a test to look for organics. Another way we can do it is we can look for these things here. So these are called aliphatic or aromatic hydrocarbons. So by aromatic, we usually mean they have benzene in them. So this here is benzene. And you can see it's a 6-carbon structure with basically 3 double bonds. So it alternates double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, and so on. So anything with a benzene in it, so you can see we have like naphthalene, basically is kind of like not quite 2 benzenes, there's not 12 carbons there, but 2 ring structures stapled together and so on. And the reason why I'm mentioning these things here is because they interact with ultraviolet light. Those conjugated double bonds do. So this is something that you never used to hear about in the industry, but you're hearing about it a lot more now, is they will take a UV 254 reading. So that means they're using spectroscopy. So go back and think about, what was that, lab 4, when you guys did the iron spectroscopy. I don't remember which wavelength you were reading the compound in. You remember? 500. 510 is Zishan is saying. So that's about what's 510? Is that green, I think? In this case, we're using UV light. So basically looking to see, does the water sample absorb at 254 nanometers? Pure water does not, but these, particularly these aromatic hydrocarbons do. And so this is like a really quick and easy measuring to do. If you remember your the spectrophotometer used in the lab, you blanket with a little bit of water, and then you put your sample in and you write down the number. So it's a super quick test. It's very, very dirty, not even as good as BOD. BOD takes 5 days though. So this is just a very quick test to see, do you have a reading? And if it's close to 0, then that's good. If it's higher than 0, then I'm not sure what a bad reading looks like, but maybe that's something we can ask them on the tour. So just to go back to answer, I guess Fahad's question is, industrial wastewater can look like many things. And if you think about industrial wastewater, they're going to have the typical stuff that you're going to have in houses. So sanitary sewage, from the toilets and so on. The cooling is another big one, like I said, with the thermal power generation. And then processing wastewater is the other big one, kind of just depending on what they're doing. Are they making oil? Are they a pulp and paper mill? Are they making yogurt? Like I said, we've got a lot of different possible things that you can make with industrial wastewater. So here's some numbers from some different industries, and you can see some industries make a lot more solids, put a lot more organics in there based on the BOD. Some industries change the pH quite a bit. I think I mentioned the yogurt industry in particular will drop the pH, and you can't just put a bunch of acidic water down the drain. They have to adjust that before it leaves the plant. Again, depends on the exact process, right? Too. My understanding is making that Greek yogurt that everyone likes nowadays is really makes a lot of acid in the process, because they're making a lot more yogurt and they're concentrating it down, and that's why it's so yummy, because you're packing a lot more fat into one little tin of yogurt. And it's very delicious. That's how you make food good, right? You add sugar, fat, or salt. All the things that are bad for you. So let's talk a little bit about stormwater as well. So stormwater, right? We're thinking, okay, no problem. This is natural stuff. But think about what's going on if you're out in the forest versus what's going on in the city, right? In the forest, much of the water is going to get absorbed by the soil, or it's going to run off and go into a natural watershed. So there's streams and rivers and lakes that it's eventually going to go into, and everybody out there is happy. But in a city, we have a lot more concrete. We have roads, we have buildings that are not allowing the water to necessarily go and find its way naturally to the river. And of course, we're not wanting our streets to be flooded. We're wanting a bit more control of what's going on here. So we need systems for basically dealing with stormwater. The other problem with stormwater is it does get polluted a little bit. Think about all the things that we have, going down your driveway, right? It could be picking up some tar. Could be picking up a little bit of oil from your car. Could be picking up pesticides from your lawn and those kind of things. And we don't want to dump that necessarily directly into the river right away. So there's just kind of showing some of the things that could get picked up by stormwater. And just depending on the circumstance, it could be really bad, or it could be barely polluted, right? Kind of depends on what's going on. So we usually try to not dump them directly into the river right away, at least anyway. It kind of depends on the design of the system. So when we're looking at sewer systems, there's often two types of sewer systems that we see in cities. And this is something that you can ask them at the tour, say, what type of sewer system do we have? Do we have a combined system or a separate system? So let's take a look at both these. I want to show you the separate system first. Just take a look here on the right, okay? And so notice the separate system. You've got a storm drain, right? And the storm drain is going out and is going to a pond or a creek or something like that. And that's it, right? So all that storm water that runs down your street, it goes into a grating, and the storm water goes to its own system. The sewage, so you flush your toilet, it goes down its own system. So there it goes. And this is eventually going to go to a wastewater treatment plant. So that's a separate system. And so separate systems are kind of the modern standard. So my understanding is in Fort McMurray, if you live in the newer parts of town, so if you live in Timberley, I'm not actually sure about Thickwood. I think Thickwood is also a separate sewer system. I don't exactly know when Thickwood was built. My understanding is many of the houses were built in the 1980s, which would probably make it a separate sewer system. Then you have a separate sewer system. You go in an older part of town, so downtown, waterways, Gregoire, they have a combined system. So what does combined mean? Combined means that it's all together. So notice this storm drain here. On the left, it's going to combine with the sewage, and that's all going to go to the wastewater treatment plant. So this is kind of a different system. So why would you do that, right? Why do we have to treat all this stormwater? Well, think about all the pipes and infrastructure. Rather than having two sets of pipes, you have one set of pipes. Problem is you're treating a whole bunch of extra wastewater, particularly in the spring when it rains and melts and all that, right? So I'll come back to this one on the left here in a moment. You can see with this dam and this outfall. I'll talk about that in a minute. So one of the things that you often see with these combined systems is they'll often just kind of ignore what's going on over here for a second. So most of the water is going to come and it's going to go to the wastewater treatment plant. A lot of these have these overflow areas. And so what that means, and this is kind of disgusting, is that when there's too much water, the water treatment plant can only handle so much. So it means that the excess water will overflow and in some cases literally get discharged to the environment. And so that does include sewage as well. So in Fort McMurray, we actually have a system for this. When we get excess water, we have some ponds at the wastewater facility where we put overflow. So it doesn't necessarily get discharged directly into the river, but in some places, this is standard practice. You get too much rain and it mixes with the sewage and goes to the river or a pond or something like that. So these are just some pictures showing the different systems. You can see here's the storm system on the right. And, that's just the rain flow, and it might get a little polluted, and we'll talk about the pollution in a minute. And then you've got the sanitary system there on the left, and that's going to go get treated at the wastewater treatment facility. And yet another picture just showing the system here. This one I kind of like because it shows you what's going on in the house. And again, depending on your house, you may or may not have this kind of system. most houses with water running off the roof, it goes through an eaves trough and through a pipe and it just gets discharged to your yard. But in some places, it'll actually get discharged directly to the storm sewer system, which is shown right here. So, and then one more picture for you here. There we go. Just finding different perspectives on this. So one thing I was going to say about these pictures here, and a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but our wastewater usually, in most cases, flows away from our house sheerly due to gravity. So there's got to be a bit of an incline. You can see that there's or decline, not an incline, bit of a decline on our system. And all of these pipes here have a bit of a decline as well. So you can see that here as well. And you can see this decline, all the water is running down because of gravity, which is good. So we like gravity. Sometimes though, you may have a problem if you're living at the bottom of a hill. And if that's your house, then you may need to have a sewage pump, or the city may have a sewage pump for the street. And sometimes you see these city buildings in different places. I don't know if we have any of those in Fort McMurray or not, but good question on that one. I thought I had another picture here, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So design considerations, slope, elevation. I think I've kind of mentioned some of that stuff. Oh yeah, this is the picture I was thinking of. So you're probably wondering this, okay, think about it, right? That means that the pipes are going to get deeper and deeper and deeper as they get towards the wastewater treatment plant. Not necessarily. So you can see there's a bit of a decline here. And then what they have periodically, so they don't have to keep digging the pipes deeper, is they have these little lift stations. So these lift stations basically will take it and raise it. And now you can have another decline. And there's can't remember how many of these are in Fort McMurray. This is what they look like. This is the one, it's actually right across the street from Canadian, or not the entire Home Hardware. And you can see it actually says lift station. So I can't remember how many we have in Fort McMurray. I think we have 8 or 12 or something like that. And so, yeah, that's another question you can ask them at the tour, and maybe they could tell you a little bit about the lift stations. So another thing that sewer systems have to consider is that our systems are not 100%. One of the issues with our systems is that with time, most of these systems usually get infiltration inflow. And a little bit of a difference between infiltration and inflow, but what that means is that, you know, you can imagine you've got cracks in the pipes, and you get excess water getting in there in the systems. So when they design these things, they have to not just take into consideration how many homes a pipe is going to service, but they have to add, I think it's something like 15% when they're considering infiltration inflow. So let's talk about this stormwater. I thought some of these things were a little bit earlier. So you can see that, you know, we mentioned that stormwater, it's just rainwater, right? But it could be picking up stuff as it goes along, right? It could be picking up a little bit of, you know, roof tar and you know, road salt and things like that. And we'd rather not just, you know, throw that directly into the river. So usually we have some sort of collection area for stormwater. And you've probably seen, I'll come back to that in a second, some of these places around town. I have some photos of some of them. This one is on Prospect Drive, and usually we landscape them, and you know, we'll put little walking trails and, you know, dog trails around them, and you know, they're pretty nice for the neighborhoods, and if you live on the edge of one of them, you might call it your lake. And things like that. I know I have some other pictures here. You can see this one is on Brett Drive. It actually says stormwater pond, stay off. You know, and the water is not too bad, and the water will actually support some wildlife. You know, these are basically areas for the stormwater to go to, so we don't have to discharge it directly into the river. You know, any solids will settle out, and usually these have overflows that do eventually go to the river. So they're kind of like giant clarifiers, right? There's another one, Sparrowhawk Drive, and I know this one, I saw some Canadian geese at it one day. I don't live up in Sparrowhawk Drive area, but I did stop there one day to go for a little walk, and I saw some geese. I can't remember what year that was. So I was just going to go back here. Here's some storm drain covers and a couple of these from around town. And a lot of them will have little labels on them. So this one says here, dump no waste, drains to stream. So I don't really know where that one was. I found it in the parking lot in Edmonton. This one here is right outside the college. And you can see the warning here. They're telling people, please don't put your garbage in here. This is for stormwater only. So keep that in mind, right? When you're outside, try not to put your garbage in those things. So I was gonna, there's another one there, Swallow Way. There was, I can't remember again what year that was, not too long ago. Somebody had done a study on one of these sites and they found goldfish in there. Anyone remember that? It was in the news a few years ago. Because these goldfish were monsters. They were really big. Humans, like, honestly, if you have goldfish or a boa constrictor or some sort of animal that you don't want anymore, please don't release it to the wild. Goldfish are really hardy animals, and they're also an invasive species. Thankfully, these ponds are not, they're human made. They're not meant to be contaminate the rest of the world, but people are all surprised at these giant goldfish they found in there, and I wasn't surprised at all because it's pretty common for people to have some mercy on their goldfish and put them out in there. But just shows they can support wildlife, even if the water is a little bit contaminated anyway. Usually by the time it gets here, it starts to clean up anyway. So this is also true for a lot of farms. We've been talking a little bit here and there about agriculture, and you can imagine if you have a farm and you have 500 heads of cattle, that's a lot of manure. And you can't just let all that manure run into the, into the environment and pollute the nearby river or whatever. So a lot of farms will actually have these retention ponds as well. And sometimes you see them when you're driving along the highway and you go by a farm and there's a big square pond like thing. And that's the whole idea. It's designed so that the wastewater will run into the pond and have a chance to, let nature take its course before it goes out and pollutes the rest of the world. So take a look for those. Sometimes you'll see them along the highway by farms, these big square kind of pond-like things. So a few things here. I did send you guys a list of questions. Here's a few others I was just thinking about that might be worth to ask in terms of when you go on the tour. I'm sure you have lots of other questions, but these are some of the questions I've asked before. And interestingly, for the first one, I get different answers depending on who you ask. I don't think necessarily everybody knows what's under the ground until they start digging. I'm curious though, number two, whether they do upgrade the systems. If they do digging downtown, do they start replacing them with separate sewer systems, or is that just too expensive? I'd be really curious about that as well. So a few other things to kind of mention about wastewater. There have been last, I don't know how many years, I guess at least 10 years it looks like, the federal government has taken initiative to basically force a lot of places to upgrade. There were, even as of 20 years ago, there were some big Canadian cities that were basically dumping their wastewater directly into the ocean or whatever, right? This is 20 years ago. This isn't like 100 years ago in the Stone Ages or anything like that. This was relatively recent within your lifetime. So they've started to, force upgrades of these things. The timeline is long. You can imagine that we're talking about millions of dollars, and large cities, it's even more complicated. There's been a few exemptions. You can see NWT Nunavut and some northern areas of Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador were exempt. Again, you're not dealing with massive populations. But I know Halifax was a big problem, and I don't really actually know where they're at. But 20 years ago, Halifax was dumping all their wastewater directly into the ocean. So fun to be the ocean over there. I found this little chart. I know it's old, but it's kind of showing the progress. You can see it's talking about in terms of treatment. So if you look at this first one, in 1983, 28% of municipalities in Canada had no treatment, none. That's crazy. That's not that long ago, right? Like 1983. Wow. 2004 down to 3%. So that's pretty good progress in a short amount of time, right? Depends on what kind of treatment you're talking about. And when we talk about wastewater treatment, we're going to talk about 3 stages. Primary is really basic treatment. It means you're kind of screening things out, and letting solids settle out, and that's about it. Secondary is kind of the biggest area of treatment, and most places are doing that, but you can see we're still only, well, this is 2004 at 47%. And tertiary treatment is really not necessary, but a lot of places are upgrading to tertiary treatment, which is kind of a whole extra layer of what's going on. So don't worry about those terms too much. We're going to talk about them soon. But the more treatment, the more better is kind of the way we're going. And like I said, I'd love to have some more current data on this whole thing and see what's going on. Because I just was shocked to learn this, that a lot of places are just basically still dumping it into a river or the ocean. This is a bit more recent data. This is a 2009 inventory, and apparently there are 2,100 sewage treatment plants across Canada. So I don't know if that's a lot or not. I have no idea.
The data of the amount of cities along the Fraser River in BC that dump directly into the river is scary.
It's horrifying, right? Like, I mean, but this is human history, right? In that you know, this is what we've done for a long time, and you know, it's just been the past 100 years where we've sort of started to understand that this is not a good idea, and it just shows you it takes a lot of time for us to change our habits. And you know, when money is involved, you know, it's economically cheaper just to dump your stuff into the river, and if you can get away with it, and you can, you know, lobby politicians to allow you to continue to do it, you know, why not, right? It's kind of crazy, but you know, good news is there is, like I said, you know, in terms of what the federal government is doing, is they are forcing change. It's just going to take us a couple more decades to get through all the change, unfortunately.
Have you watched the documentary on Netflix that just came out called Seaspiracy?
No, oh, I don't know if I wanted to.
Well, you watch it objectively. Yeah, you watch it objectively, but it definitely brought up some different angles that hasn't been in mainstream media. It was an interesting watch, but you definitely have to watch it objectively for sure.
It's so easy to target these industries, right, and talk about, you know, I mean, I know there was one a number of years ago, I can't remember which one it was called, about the food industry and practices in slaughterhouses, and like it's just horrifying, right? You know, I mean, it was making people cry. But, you know, I was trying to, like you said, think about these things objectively in the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
There is a demand for cheap meat, right? And this is part of, you know, I mean, how much do you want to pay for your pork chops or your chicken breasts or whatever, right? You know, this is part of the cost into making these things cheaper. Sometimes it's horrifying practices. I'm not justifying that, but I'm saying, you know, that, you know, it's so easy to think about this as, oh, that poor animal. But it's much more than just that, right? You've got the whole economic thing, and, you know, we certainly love to have our cheap chicken. And, you know, we're outraged when KFC, you know, raises the price of their bucket by 30 cents. You know, I mean, this is the world we live in, and we can change. And sometimes it takes these things, these exposures, to, you know, make more people think about it and say, hey, maybe I'm willing to pay a little bit more for my chicken, or a little bit more for whatever, if they're going to be a bit more humane about it, right?
I wish we had more time in the lectures so we could talk and, like, not really debate, but discuss certain subjects, but not enough time.
it's well, you know, they're well worthwhile discussions, right? And I think, yeah, especially I find environmental students tend to, you know, probably in this type of program because you have a little bit to say in general, right?
Well, and it's fun to talk with other people just to get different angles. Like I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
that documentary really highlighted some vantage points that I never even thought about.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all have our own background and things that we think about, and even knowledge base, and you know, learning about industries is very interesting, right? I mean, it's like, well, I mean, you know, living in Alberta in general, right? And you know, there's the perception, all the perceptions from the world about oil companies, and you know, here we're hearing all of it, right? I think, you know, there's certainly people in Alberta that don't like the oil companies, but probably more people are more pro oil here than otherwise. And I think it's kind of funny because it's like, you know, in some ways the pro oil people are just as bad as the anti-oil people. They're not thinking about the other perspectives. And to me, I mean, I have no foot in the game other than I drive a car. You know, that it's, I think it's valid to think about all the different perspectives for sure.
absolutely.
So let's talk about wastewater here. I got a few more things to finish up. I guess I meant to put this up front. You know, why are we treating wastewater? Well, we're trying to protect ourselves again. You know, human health is important. Our wildlife health is important. So if we're putting this stuff into the river or wherever else, it's going to have effects, right? And you can imagine if we were polluting our water here, if who's downstream, we've got Fort McKay, we've got Fort Chip, they are going to be upset. So it's really is our responsibility to, you know, if we're going to discharge water, to think about who is downstream and what is suffering or benefiting from that water that we're putting into the river, right? Also, aesthetic qualities. If you look back through history, you know, most Canadian places aren't necessarily old enough to remember this, but if you look at, you know, medieval records in 1800 Victorian times, and you read these records about how bad the river looked and smelled, you can imagine we're very happy that we treat wastewater now, right? Sometimes this last one, further uses. So I'll talk about this in the next unit here. But there's a lot of places where the wastewater is, well, it's cleaner than the river water, and it's valuable. So it's further purified for other uses, including in some places in the world drinking. So I'll talk about that, like I said, in the next unit. So I think that's actually it for this topic. I didn't realize it was so short. There's some study questions for you. So I am going to follow up. I think we've got the first group going to the treatment plant on Thursday morning. So I'll follow up with some more details on Wednesday. If your ride situation changes, please let me know, or tomorrow know as soon as possible. For anybody getting the ride, we're meeting at 20 to 9 at the door, kind of by the environmental lab, the outside door there. It's possible we could be a little slower. That we can only get the vehicles at 8:30, so if they're slow there, it could be 1:45. But try to meet there at 22. And if you're driving there, try to meet at 9 a.m. And when you get there, you can check in. They have a little sign-in place, and you can wait for the group. Any questions about the field trip at all?
Yeah, I have a question on how to get there. Do you have to do the little roundabout just by the Ford dealership there?
See, that's what I'm trying to remember. I was thinking about this morning. I feel like what I did last time was I drove to the lights to turn to Taganova Park.
Yeah.
And so then you turn right at the lights, and then the next turn right is like a dirt road or something. And then that goes all the way.
Oh, that's straight. And then you're going backwards.
Yeah, you're backtracking. And it's the big blue building. And when you turn into their parking lot, you got to go all the way down to the end to the left. And there's an office. I think it says office, and it looks like an office. It's really obvious. It's way down at the end, though.
Okay, thank you.
And there's usually, it should be no problem with parking. There's lots of parking spots there. Okay, any more thoughts or comments? If not, I guess that's it for today. Okay, well, I will see everyone on Wednesday then.
Thank you.
All right, take care. We'll see you later.
Thanks.
Thanks.